We're now going to move over to the Office for National Statistics. So we're going to start with a presentation from Jan Farnall. So Jan currently leads the Social Survey Research and Production Division at the ONS and has overall responsibility for the delivery of ONS household surveys. And she's worked in several areas across the end-to-end survey process, including leading the field and telephone data collection, managing the delivery of various household financial surveys, and leading a number of development and enabling functions. And she's worked at the ONS for 17 years. And Jen will be joining us online, and she's going to speak for 15 to 20 minutes, and then there'll be a chance for questions and discussions. So if we can get Jen up.
Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Hello everyone. I won't introduce myself any further. Yeah, I'm Jen. Nice to be here today. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm just going to cover, I'll try and talk for about 15 or 20 minutes to leave a bit of time for questions at the end, and do a kind of more general presentation on the recovery work that we're doing at the moment in the ONS on our household surveys. So most of you are probably aware of all of this because it's very much in the public domain at the moment, but the context that we're working in is some really significant challenges across the survey data collection sector. So this isn't just facing ONS, this is being seen by private sector companies as well, principally driven by a substantial change in the willingness of the public to participate in our voluntary surveys, alongside the impact of inflation on the cost of running surveys. So, for example, interviewers are twice as likely to get a refusal from citizens as they were pre-pandemic, and the response rates and numbers of achieved interviews are now falling to below viable levels. So we've seen that response rates across the whole sector have settled at around 10 to 20% percentage points lower than they were before the pandemic because of the societal changes, things like respondent security and confidentiality concerns. But we have also seen that the quality of government surveys and ONS's social surveys has been disproportionately impacted, probably because of their voluntary nature and the significant length of them and our continued reliance on in-home face-to-face interviewing because of the complex topics that we collect. And in terms of the organisational context, I'm sure many of you will have seen the PACAC hearings the last 2 weeks. We've just had some reviews published, the Devereux report and the new economic statistics strategy were published a couple of weeks ago. And all of this basically gives us a focus going forward of recovering the quality of what we do across our core statistics and improving the confidence of users in what we're doing. So doing less better. And social surveys have been in this space for a little while now, so we already have existing plans and investment in having this focus, which I'll cover now. So where are we? So we have already been thinking about prioritising our surveys during significant wider change in the organisation. So as most of you will know, we made the difficult decision earlier this year to stop the survey of living conditions, recognising this would impact user needs, but there was a real need to prioritise other things due to the capacity in the field and such factors. We have now secured a £27 million investment for this financial year, with increased scrutiny on the outcomes of how we're spending that money and what the impact of that is. Slightly less relevant to this conference, but I thought I would mention it because it's important context. I think that we've set up a new TLFS, so Transformed Labour Force Survey programme, to bring all of that work together sort of separately from our other household surveys with increased accountability. And many of you would have, if you've watched the PACAC hearing, will have seen that was covered quite extensively there. And then we've published, alongside the reviews I've mentioned, we've published a surveys improvement and enhancement plan, which sets out how we're going to recover quality on our surveys. So I guess the key message is we know what we need to do, but it's not very easy. So now I'm just going to quickly cover a little bit about that improvement and enhancement plan, which we're calling the IEP, the core outcomes that we are looking to get from the work within it. And then I will talk a little bit about progress to date and some things we've got planned for this financial year. So there are 4 key outcomes in the plan, which everything is kind of centred around, which are sustainable field operations, refreshed citizen relationship, improved survey and statistical design, and technology improvement. So you can see on this slide broadly what we're trying to achieve under each of those things: improving the capacity and capability in our interviewer communities, improving the trust in the organisation, the brand recognition of ONS, and improving the understanding from the public of how important it is to take part in our surveys, redesigning or sort of iterating the design of our surveys to be more streamlined and reduce the significant respondent burden we know there is, and improving the accessibility of them for the public, and then improving the systems and processes that underpin our survey data collection, taking opportunities to make that as efficient as possible and agile to adapt to changing needs. So as I said, I'll just cover a little bit about some progress we've already made and then what our plans are for this financial year under this plan. So in terms of sustainable field operations, I think it's fairly widely known that lots of the challenges we've had over the last couple of years have been related to the capacity that we have in the field, the number of interviewers that we have, and the fact that we've been unable to fully cover all of our survey portfolio. So in the last 18 months, we've gone from 517 interviews in the field to over 800. I think we're on 819 this week, with the further plans for this year to get up to 1,023 interviewers by April. We've done that by partnering with an external recruitment company who have a wider reach than we can get from our traditional civil service recruitment methods, and that's proving successful. I will say it's not an easy thing to bring large numbers of people into a structure at a time, and we're also dealing with quite significant attrition of interviewers. So that, as well as bringing in those interviewers, we also need to increase the number of managers we have, think about the processes we have to support them, think about the tech and the hardware that they need. So it's a massive operation to do that. We've also introduced something called coaching and learning partners, where we have introduced a progression for interviewers. So very experienced interviewers can become coaching and learning partners at a higher grade, and they provide one-to-one support in the field for new interviewers and more experienced interviewers on anything from doorstep practice, persuasion techniques, or specific things about the surveys that we run. So this year, as well as continuing that work to increase the number of interviewers we have, we're also, the field management team are doing a big focus on the ways that interviewers are working. So really thinking about optimum calling patterns when they're starting work in the field period, making sure calls are made at all different times of the day and week and so forth. So back to basics, but really making sure that there's a focus on that for every interviewer in the field. And then there's also a piece of work going on to introduce an interviewer recognition scheme, which I won't say too much about because we're just working through what that means. But we have had a pay flex case approved by the Treasury to give us a budget for being able to recognise interviewers through recognition pay for the work that they're doing in the field. So that's sustainable field operations. In terms of refreshed citizen relationship, there's a couple of key strands of work here, both of which we've made progress on already, and we will plan to continue making progress on those in 25-26. So we've got a whole programme of incentives research, which I've got a slide on each of these in a minute with a bit more detail, so I'll cover that there. And we've also just finished running a pilot marketing campaign in Birmingham. Again, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. That aims to address some of those barriers around people trusting us or recognising ONS's brand, and some of that reluctance to take part in surveys or to give their data and so on. So in terms of the next steps on those things, we want to evaluate that campaign and recommend next steps for that. And then we also have got some really exciting research planned on looking at differential incentives, so targeted incentives to particular groups of people to try and help with representativeness, and also discretionary incentives that interviewers can use on the doorstep to give them another tool in their toolkit to help persuade someone to take part. And then the final strand of work under that one, which we will be progressing this year, is exploring mandation of surveys. So the UK is one of the countries that doesn't mandate its surveys. There are lots of other, for example, when you compare LFS, labour force survey response rates, with other countries, lots of them get response rates in the 70 or 80%, but they mandate their surveys. And there's a whole complexity of things to think about with that, such as you have to be willing to take people to court if they don't take part, a bit like the census. So we're going to do some work to explore whether that would be possible. In terms of improved survey and statistical design, this year we've made quite significant progress on the transformed labour force survey design. As I said earlier, slightly less relevant, but it's important to know that we're working on things across our suite of surveys. So we've just launched a TLFS core, very short version of the TLFS with just the core labour market questions. So that's just been launched this week, I think, or last week. We've implemented some quite significant survey methods and operational changes for the International Passenger Survey, and we've set up a new division for research and innovation work to really highlight the need for investing in developing our surveys and basing all of that on best practice. So for this year, we now have, which again, I'll talk about this in a minute, we have a programme of development work on the living costs and food survey, because we recognise that in various bits of the end-to-end process, there was a need to do some development. We have just had a Office for Statistics Regulation review on the Wealth and Assets Survey. So we will be publishing a plan in the autumn of how we're going to respond to the requirements OSR have set out for WAS. We will be refining the TLFS core survey I just mentioned. We'll be completing the work on the International Passenger Survey under the Travel and Tourism Reform project. And we will also be exploring the use of AI and alternative data in our survey data collection. And then finally, under technology improvement, so far we've implemented systems for TLFS and the Family Resources Survey processing using open source software and a reproducible analytical pipeline approach. And we will be, there's a team specifically for that pipeline development who are currently developing pipelines for the Wealth and Asset Survey and Living Costs and Food Survey ready for implementation this year and next year. We will also be producing a roadmap to reducing our legacy systems. So there's a big drive in the organisation at the moment in terms of reducing some very old systems. So the pipeline work is part of that. And we have got a project on the go looking at using automatic receipt coding for the Living Costs and Food Survey. So a system, a process that's able to automatically read receipts from supermarkets, etc., and enter the data into the system, reducing the time for coding a case. I can't remember the exact figures, but reducing the time by hours, I think, where that's done manually at the moment. And then, as I said, investigation of AI and novel collection tools. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of the work that we have that's in the improvement and enhancement plan, which is public. I'll pop a link in the chat when I finished, if anyone hasn't read it yet and would like to. So I'm just going to quickly cover a couple of the things I've mentioned in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I mentioned that we've done a pilot marketing campaign in Birmingham. This was designed to address barriers around the legitimacy of a survey, the security of data and ONS brand recognition. So we did this in Birmingham because it's a local authority area with historically low response rates, particularly among young people, ethnic minority groups and economically disadvantaged communities. And the pilot drew on insights from Census 2021 communications campaign, as well as industry best practice. So the campaign includes use of a broadcast video and local digital billboards to target messages to survey participants using postcode data, as well as a postcard which was delivered to all of the households in the sample in that area. So you can see on here a couple of quotes from the public from previous research that we've done around trust, which is why this campaign was done, as I said. So I'm worried the survey could be a scam. I'm unsure if my data will remain confidential. I don't know who ONS is. And that kind of messaging has been coming through in research across different topics, not necessarily about trust, but time and time again that kind of messaging is coming through, which is why we undertook this campaign. I will just see whether, if I play this video, can you let me know if you can't hear it, because it's just a very quick demo of the broadcast video.
If you've been chosen to take part in an ONS survey, it's so important that you join the thousands of people across the UK taking part. The information you share helps us produce important statistics. These allow us to understand things like the cost of living and impact decisions like mortgage rates and rent prices. It starts with you, so look out for your invitation letter in the post.
So we're now undertaking a comprehensive analysis and evaluation of all of the data we've collected to look at the impact of the campaign on awareness of ONS, trust in ONS or trust in the survey, and what it has done to response rates. Early results suggest that there has been a positive impact overall, but not necessarily on the groups that we might want it to have an impact on. But we're working through that evaluation at the moment. So that's the comms campaign. In terms of incentives, as I've already mentioned, there's a couple of different strands that we're exploring. So we haven't mentioned this yet. So one of the things we're doing is exploring the optimum incentive amount. So we increased the respondent incentive for taking part in our surveys the back end of 2023. So across our survey portfolio in 24 to 25. So we're now looking at what the potential optimum amount is. So we know that an increased incentive increases response rates and potentially representativity, but we also know that there's the law of diminishing returns. So there's a kind of plateau where if you introduce a little, a higher incentive, it doesn't make much more difference. So we're basically trying to pinpoint what the optimum amount is post-pandemic, because we've not done that work since pre-pandemic. We are also looking, as I said, at targeted incentives. So we've got a trial running at the moment on our opinions and lifestyle survey, which is offering £10 to our underrepresented group, so ethnic minority groups and younger age groups. And initial results of this are really positive and show that it's having an impact on those groups in particular. So we'll be completing that trial, completing the analysis, and then working out whether we want to roll something like that out to our other surveys. We're also, at the same time as looking at monetary incentives, also continuing to explore non-monetary incentives. So we've got a plan to pilot the sending of a notepad with the advance letter on the living cost and food survey later this financial year, which is a pretty cheap way of, if it has an impact, of being able to slightly increase response rates, and also not just response rates, but the percentage of people that might just open the envelope who may not have done if there wasn't a notepad in it. And as I said, we are looking at differential incentives, so starting to move away from a one-size-fits-all approach. We know that we need to really think about, as response rates go down, representativity and bias becomes even more important. So being able to offer different incentives to different groups is really important. So that is the programme of work that we have going on incentives. And then I also just wanted to run through quickly the work on LCF development that I mentioned. So there's various different work streams happening, some on the survey design. So we've got a plan to boost the sample from April 2026. And we're also looking at what it means. So I mentioned that we stopped the survey of living conditions. We are integrating essential content from that into the living costs and food survey. So there's quite a bit of work that goes alongside that, looking at, well, what does that mean for sampling and weighting? What does that mean for editing, for example? So under processing, you can see we're looking at moving away from manual editing, and that's being driven by the fact that we want to integrate SRC content and SRC topics into LCF. We're also looking at the questionnaire. So across most of our household surveys, we haven't had the resource to do a huge amount of work on the questionnaire. any of the questionnaires. So we're looking at basically streamlining where possible, looking for quick wins of things we can take off, as well as looking at that content from SRC. And then we are also looking at the respondent diary. So I've mentioned the automatic receipt coding. We're also looking at an interviewer-facing Blaze-based diary, which is currently done in Excel, and more future-facing, we'll be looking at a respondent digital diary. And then alongside all of those things, we're uplifting. We've got a plan to uplift the LCF survey from Blaze 4.8 to Blaze 5, and we have a programme of work looking at that across all of our surveys, and updating our questionnaire coding and processing to a new version of the COICOP framework, which is an expenditure coding framework. So alongside all of that, I've mentioned a couple of these already, various other pieces of quality work happening. So we've mentioned that the Office for Statistics Regulation has given us some requirements for the Wealth and Asset Survey, and we will be working through a plan for those over the next couple of months and publishing something in the autumn that sets out how we plan to address those. I've mentioned the Blaze 5 uplift, so across all of our surveys, uplifting to a newer version of Blaze, which sounds simple but is anything but. And then the reproducible analytical pipelines team, which I just have a couple of points to cover on. So that team and that work is around rebuilding our legacy data processing systems using open source tools, the principles of the reproducible analytical pipeline best practice, and that helps to facilitate the Blaze 5 uplift. And then we'll be looking at how we maintain and support those pipelines going forward, and upskilling survey teams in maintaining those. So very quickly, the benefits of reproducible analytical pipeline approach compared to the legacy systems are things like efficiency, as you would imagine. So, for example, the International Passenger Survey imputation system that's been developed in this new way runs in less than a minute compared to over 2 hours with the old system. There's much more consistency, so results run the same every time the analysis is run, which is reduction of human error. It's more transparent, so the processes and the coding is clearer and more auditable for stakeholders, and it's more cost effective because of that time piece. So just to very quickly then go back to where we are. So just to run through, I've already covered this slide, but I wanted to just loop back to it to say we've made some difficult decisions already on prioritisation. The organisation as a whole has now done that. We do have investment and recognition that surveys are really, really important and we have to invest in them. And we have set up the new TLFS programme to sort of reduce the impact of that on other things, and published our surveys improvement and enhancement plan that sets out what we need to do. But as I said, it's not easy. And that is all I wanted to cover. So I'm happy to take any questions from online or in the room.